Since the Ukraine crisis started in early 2014, the United Kingdom has had 10 separate foreign secretaries. Which one was the worst? Good morning, everybody. It is Saturday, the 24th of January, and I'm Ian Proud, and I'm the peacemonger. Now, since the Ukraine crisis kicked off actually at the back end of 2013, with the approach to the Vilnius Eastern Partnership Summit, the UK has gone through 10 different foreign secretaries. And if there's one truth about the way government works, it's that ministers need to be in their roles for some considerable period of time to really affect what the departments that they govern are doing, to really have an impact on them. And that has never really been the case when it comes to Ukraine and Russia policy. And what this means is that the state, or the deep state, as some people like to call it, has outsized power in terms of affecting what the government policy should be. That power, as it relates to Ukraine and Russia policy, has only increased over the past 12 years as the Foreign Office and as the intelligence agencies, the MOD, have been given extra resources to focus on the issue of Russia and Ukraine policy, meaning that the role of ministers and their ability to impact the organization, the Whitehall blob, and shift the dial on policy has been significantly reduced. Only four foreign secretaries over the past 12 years have served for longer than 1 year. David Cameron only managed to get in about 7.5 months, before the Labour government was elected. And I'm going to go through them, looking at for each of the 10 foreign secretaries, looking at five different characteristics. First, their level of Russophobia. Second, their diplomatic skills. Third, their policy input on Ukraine and Russia policy. Fourth, their impact on the organization, i.e., the Foreign Office. And fifth, their popularity within the organization. Now, of course, what is striking when I look through this is firstly who came in ranked top, i.e., not the worst, and not necessarily the best, either. That really came as a surprise to me, and the judgment would have been different had I factored in the period of time when three of the foreign secretaries were also prime minister during the same period. Had I also included their periods as prime minister, then the judgment may have turned out slightly differently. But there we are. I mean, I've only focused on their time as foreign secretary, and it's really, really important to emphasize that as I start off with my number 10, if you like, going in descending order from the least bad to the worst. And that, surprisingly, I mean, it really surprised me this morning when I was thinking about it, was Boris Johnson, who was Foreign Secretary for 2 years, from 2016, July of 2016 through to July of 2018. Now, when you look at the five different factors that I've considered his Russophobia, at that time, Boris Johnson wasn't obviously Russophobic, quite the opposite. He has some family heritage on his maternal grandmother's side to Russia, some ancient relatives dating back, going back to Sochi in the south of Russia, for example. He spoke a bit of Russian. He appeared genuinely interested in engaging, with the Russian state. Bear in mind that when he came to power, he followed the extremely dour and Russophobic Philip Hammond, who'd been Foreign Secretary from the summer of 2014 through to the summer of 2016. And Boris Johnson came in specifically with an intention to actually shift the dial on Russia policy away from the excessively hawkish position that Philip Hammond had taken. So as soon as Boris Johnson hit the hot seat in King Charles Street, in the summer of 2016, he was already working to try and reset, UK relations, with Russia, and I'll come on to that, shortly. So he wasn't obviously at that time a Russophobe. On his diplomatic skills, they were actually higher than people give him credit for. I mean, certainly as it relates to Russia. During his time as Foreign Secretary, after a period in which Philip Hammond had avoided at all costs, talking to his Russian counterpart. Boris Johnson sought ways to engage, and actually, when he was able to engage, certainly towards the back end of 2017, he was able to build some sort of oddball kind of rapport with the veteran Sergei Lavrov in Russia, in which they were able to kind of correspond with each other, and actually, of course, meet in person in Moscow in December of 2017. So, he had those innate people skills that he could sort of form some sort of common understanding with Lavrov, and they would tease each other and joke, with each other and criticize each other, quite, actively. But that dynamic kind of worked between them. So, I always thought that actually he, sadly, he was only in place for 2 years, but he was starting to form the germ of a sort of a workable relationship with his Russian counterpart, which, frankly, his predecessor had absolutely not done. His policy input, the third factor, was very, very high. He, as I said, actively sought to change the dial on UK policy. He was involved in very much supporting the work of the Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee that did a big report on UK-Russia relations that published in May of 2017, and very much emphasized the need for a less hawkish approach with Russia, recognizing that the immense challenges that existed, of course, in the context of the Ukraine crisis. Boris Johnson used that as a springboard to kind of really re-engage, supported by Alan Duncan, his one of his junior ministers who kind of covered Russia at the time. He really kind of worked that report to actually flip, or try to flip for a short period of time UK-Russia relations in the second half of 2017 and at the very beginning of 2018 before the Salisbury nerve agent attacked. Before the Salisbury nerve agent attack happened. His impact on the organisation, however, was fairly limited. He was seen as a sort of not a serious statesperson, by much of the organisation. It has to be said. Although, having said that, I think people actually liked working with Johnson because of his kind of jokey, kind of larger than life, personality. I met him in Moscow, and he was a lot of fun. To be around. He's very much in person the way that you see him on TV, which actually can't be said for all politicians. And I think lots of people in the organisation kind of warmed to him, but people in certain echelons, I suspect, especially in the kind of Russia facing bit, were anxious about what he represented. Certainly, it's well known, and the Daily Mail reported that the intelligence agencies wanted to prevent him from accessing secret intelligence material on Russia. I saw a bit of evidence of that without going into the details. So there was a sense that people in the deep state, wanted to kind of hold him back from, what he's trying to do. And of course, for a brief period of time, he did make a huge difference to policy, and for that reason, I've marked him at number 10, the least bad, of all of the foreign secretaries. If you were to judge him on his role as prime minister, you might put him as number 1 or number 2 on the list, because he completely supported the war in Ukraine. He adopted this almost Churchillian mantle where he wanted to be the person who struck a decisive blow against Vladimir Putin and a strategic victory against Russia itself. But I'm not judging him on that. I'm judging him on that brief period of time when the only time that I worked on Russia, there seemed some sort of faint hope that there might be some efforts by the government to sort of improve relations with the largest nuclear-armed country, on the planet, and for that he gets my credit. Number 9 is William Hague, who, in many ways, I regard as the best foreign secretary that I worked with during my 24-year career. He very much, wanted to reinvigorate the Foreign Office as an organization. He wanted diplomats to have proper diplomatic skills. He wanted to invest in foreign language skills. a subject obviously very close to my part. He wanted to, make the Foreign Office a strong and proud organisation. Again, as it had been kind of denuded and declawed of its kind of authority under the new Labour government, he came in with a real plan to form the organisation, which I really really kind of valued, at that time. If you look at William Hague's diplomatic skills, you'd have to say that they were very high. I mean, he was a statesperson. I mean, I regarded him as an intellectual, statesman, uh, as somebody with a clear vision of the UK's role in the world. No longer as a great power, very much as a middling power, but as a power with a country still with significant influence on the world stage, and a country that could actually convene other countries for discussions on important issues. I wrote and launched his initiative on preventing sexual violence in conflict zones. He was a statesman. He definitely had very well developed diplomatic skills. He wasn't obviously a Russophobe. He wasn't obviously a Russophile either, frankly. He was somebody who looked at countries as they were and dealt with them accordingly based on what he saw as UK national interests. His policy input, though, sadly, on Russia was mixed, I'm afraid to say. He famously got distracted by the bid to block Jean-Claude Juncker from becoming the European Council Commission president at the time when the Ukraine crisis was kicking off, and he got hitched to David Cameron's clearly unworkable plan to prevent Jean-Claude Juncker from ascending to the presidency, which was never going to work. And for that reason, the UK got sidelined from Ukraine peace talks. The Normandy meeting happened in June of 2014. Francois Hollande convened that. Angela Merkel, Petro Poroshenko, Vladimir Putin, and the UK was completely flat-footed and left out of that process. So as a result of that, he effectively fell on his sword and stepped down. He said he wanted to step away from sort of frontline ministerial politics and give up his parliamentary seat, and all the rest of it. And we lost him, and sadly, which he did fail, on Ukraine policy, but because of the position Cameron took, which I think again was a fairly balanced position. Cameron was always, it seemed to me, fairly open-minded on the Russia question. He wasn't hard over on taking a tough line on Russia. He was open to the idea of some sort of managed approachment of that situation. He certainly didn't see sanctions as a long-term sort of gamble. With Russia, I think that had William Hague stayed, then we may have ended up with a far more balanced policy towards Russia than we did. But of course, that didn't happen. So of course, the point is academic now. So his policy input, was mixed. It could have been a lot better had he stayed, but he didn't. But that's politics, as they say. His impact on the organisation, I think was very, very high, certainly as it relates to trying to improve and reform the Foreign Office, the disinvestment in Russia knowledge and expertise that had become acute during the new Labour years, and in particular, with hardly anybody who could speak Russian or really understand modern Russia. He really tried to reverse that, and that process, of improvement actually came to a grinding halt as soon as he left, and has never recovered, since that time, which is a massive shame. Was he popular in the organisation? I think it's fair to say that he was respected. I'm not sure popular would be the right word. He was a serious politician. He liked to maintain a certain distance between ministers and officials, which I worked with him a few times. I always find him incredibly professional and courteous, but challenging, obviously. I found him a great sort of foreign secretary to work for. I wouldn't necessarily say that he was liked more than he was respected, but he certainly, I don't think, was disliked in the organisation because of the work he was trying to do to improve the Foreign Office. So that's William Hague, um, and then number eight. This one is really one of the most interesting, actually, and it's Dominic Raab. Surprisingly enough, he was Foreign Secretary for just 1 year between 2021 and 2022. The timing of that is critical because he lost his office. He lost his role. He was sacked in the teeth of the Afghanistan withdrawal fiasco when he famously was on holiday when things were going really badly in Kabul. The Philip Barton, the permanent Undersecretary of State, who was also famously on holiday when things were going badly wrong in Kabul, didn't lose his job, which is genuinely interesting. Uh, I'm not going to comment on whether Philip Barton should have lost his job or shouldn't have lost his job, but the contrast is quite striking between the two figures. Why? Because Dominic Raab was deeply disliked at the Foreign Office, and he was out of sync with Joe Biden's, U.S. policy towards Ukraine in particular. I'll come on to that, the reason for that in a minute. But was Dominic Raab a Russophobe? Probably yes, I'd say. I'd say maybe not as extreme a Russophobe as some of the others, but he certainly wasn't a fan in any way of Russia. I mean, let's be completely clear about that. He didn't like Russia. He, as a human rights lawyer or somebody who claimed to work in that field, he had objections to Russia's human rights record. He didn't obviously like Russia. He didn't obviously engage much, with the Russian state either during his time. He was only there for kind of 1 year. So I would say he was a Russophobe, which is what makes this really interesting. His diplomatic skills were, very, very low. It has to be said. He wasn't a diplomat. He is not a diplomat. He's a caustic, blunt lawyer who's probably a bit entitled and used to getting his way as somebody who's an incredibly intelligent guy. I mean, absolutely, that is without doubt. But he wasn't a diplomat, at all. He was not a William Hague. In any way, so he's a Russophobe, and he wasn't a diplomat. So you're thinking, well, why is he number eight? Um, he's a number eight because of his policy input. And this is interesting because Dominic Raab wanted to deprioritize Ukraine. Uh, he, he came to office at a time when uh, uh, it was still the back end of the Trump administration. So I should have said his timing was as 2020 to 2021, not 21 to 22 for 1 year. He joined it, as foreign secretary at the back end of the first Trump administration, and um, Ukraine was stable. Yes, the separatists, still occupied the Donbass, um, but that was largely static. Ukraine was making economic reforms. It was kind of slowly in its kind of corrupt and dysfunctional way, moving, taking plodding steps towards, the long-term process of EU integration and all the rest of it. It just wasn't a big foreign policy issue, priority. We weren't going to shift the dial on Russia anytime soon. Um, why would we invest massive UK diplomatic effort into a dysfunctional, corrupt, poor post-Soviet state like Ukraine, um, that we didn't do a huge amount of trade with in the UK? He just didn't see the point of Ukraine against all the other massive sort of geopolitical priorities on the sheet. And so he deprioritized it. And I remember I thought about applying for a job in Ukraine at the time, and I phoned up the British ambassador to Ukraine at the time, and I said, "Is it really worth me applying? Because it looks like Ukraine is dropping like a stone down the priority list. And I know, and the investor wasn't very happy that that was my view, but I mean that very much, was the case. And of course, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but as soon as Biden came to office, the tone of Western policy towards Ukraine flipped. The whole debate about Ukraine joining NATO was reinvigorated. Zelensky gave up, um, on his efforts to really negotiate over the Minsk II agreements. Uh, Soft pedaled on that, revved the accelerator on getting Crimea back and all the rest of it. Stuff that we all kind of know about, and that just kick-starting that whole agenda of actually Ukraine sort of reopening the NATO debate. I mean, Raab just wasn't really up with the races in terms of that debate. He just he couldn't see the point. He didn't see Ukraine as a priority. And of course, when the fiasco in Kabul happened, uh, he was shed, by the blob, if you like. He was deeply unpopular. And I'll talk about why now. His impact on the state machine. He came in, and the first thing he did a few months into the COVID pandemic was to launch this deeply unpopular merger between the old FCO, the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and the Department for International Development, which everybody, I mean, I didn't really, I was always actually quite agnostic about it, but many people were really, really unhappy about it, particularly the different folk who felt that it was just a takeover bid by the Foreign Office, which it absolutely wasn't, by the way. So many different officers have been promoted into ambassador jobs that they're singularly unsuited for since the merger. I mean, there's no evidence really, I don't think, for that, but it's massively unpopular. He was just disliked as a leader of people. He was caustic. He, would give people head scrubbings if he didn't like their briefing. He was overly focused on detail about formatting the spreadsheets to petty and frankly ridiculous state. There's a whole culture of bullying that built up around him in his private office among officials who basically aped his behaviours to get one foot up to the rung of the ladder, towards promotion. He was just a deeply unpopular. He was probably the most unpopular foreign secretary that I can recall, just because of his, tough and uncompromising, stance. So, nobody was, or should I say, few people were sad to see the back of him. I was always ambivalent, frankly. I mean, ministers come and go, good ones, bad ones, nice ones, nasty ones, and you take what you get. But he was disliked. He was against the grain of US policy on Ukraine, and when things went badly wrong in Kabul, he was out of the door. So, impact. He tried to have a high impact. His popularity was low. Goodbye, Dominic Raab. And actually, there after that, Ukraine shot back up to the priority list in the UK Foreign Office and has remained there ever since. That was number 8. Number 7 is Jeremy Hunt, who was again another 1 year incumbent from 2018 to 2019. Jeremy Hunt was largely ignored by the Foreign Office. He was seen as a foreign secretary who was basically latched to Theresa May's sinking ship. Everybody knew that Theresa May's days as prime minister were numbered. Jeremy Hunt came in, and the state, the deep state, just saw him as a temp. They knew he would be gone at some point. Within a year or so. Took about a year before he did go, and so he was largely ignored by the organisation. I think he wasn't obviously a Russophobe. I mean, I think he's a technocrat. Seems to me. I mean, he's decent, good politician, technocrat. Not obviously a Russophobe, also a Russophile. I think it'd be hard to find any Russophiles in Westminster, quite frankly. But he wasn't obviously kind of driven by a deep-seated dislike, of Russia. His diplomatic skills never really got tested. He wasn't really around long enough. Again, I never really saw him as a statesman. I saw him as a stand-in, not a statesman, which is what he was effectively. So he didn't really actively engage, I don't think, with his Russian counterpart. His policy impact, he tried to have a high policy input, though, in his short term. Jeremy Hunt is one of those professional politicians who actually gets a ministerial job and tries to do something with it and tries to put his imprint on it. And I think that's why he's very much towards the top of the list. He does try to make a difference, whether you like the fact he's a Tory, or not. I mean, as a diplomat, I didn't really care what political party any minister belonged to, but I never did. That's probably one of the reasons why I still don't really belong to a political party, because I've spent too long dealing with ministers of all different political colours, that I just take what I find and make a judgment based on that. Um, but he did try to do something with the Foreign Office. He did try to reinvigorate William Hague's drive to improve, for example, foreign language skills at the Foreign Office. He wanted to double the number of foreign language speakers at the Foreign Office, including, of course, in Russian, where, frankly, when he arrived, things were still really floundering. That was the time. Bear in mind that I was in Moscow. He did bring in academics to talk to him about Russia for focus groups. For example, Professor Richard Sackler, who I had on last week. I mean, he was invited into the Foreign Office to meet the Foreign Secretary with a group of others to talk about what is our foreign policy right. And I think I recall Richard telling me that Jeremy Hunt seemed genuinely open to ideas and suggestions. So I mean, he was somebody who was trying to make something of the job. But in terms of his impact on the state, I mean, it is very, very low because, for example, his aspiration to double the number of speaker slots, I can tell you for a fact that the organization explicitly ignored that. They just decided to wait him out, make the right nodding movements and and ah and oh yes, minister and all the rest of it. But actually, we were so bad at foreign languages that we were never going to commit to doubling foreign language skills, because the foreign language speakers that we had, many of them couldn't speak foreign languages anyway. So how are we going to double the number? In fact, I used to joke that we could double the number, but just by getting everybody who is a speaker now to pass their exams and actually speak the languages. But that's another matter. His popularity wasn't unpopular. He wasn't popular. I mean, like, he was a minister, and I think he was respected. Like William Hague, he was respected as a professional, minister, hardworking, responsible, and all the rest of it. He wasn't actively disliked in the way that Dominic Raab was actively disliked by very, very many people in the organisation. So that's the first four, and all four in different ways try to make a bit of a difference, in different ways on Russia policy. Boris Johnson genuinely did try to reset relations with Russia. I mean, if we're judging him just on the foreign secretary, he really did. I mean, if you judge him on prime minister, he'd be at the bottom of the list, but that's not what I'm doing today. William Hague was a statesman. I think he would have got a better sort of focus on Russia um, policy had he stayed long enough after the massive cock up, frankly, over the Normandy format and the UK being excluded from that. I think had he stayed around longer, we may have ended up in a far better place, relatively speaking, than where we did. Dominic Raab just to see Ukraine as a priority, and he lost his job as a result of that. I mean, of course, it's because of Kabul, but the organisation, was very, very happy to see him go. And Jeremy Hunt, for a big period of time, did try to make a difference. I think, but was ignored by the office because they knew he was going to disappear anyway. So then the next three are the three foreign secretaries who brought absolutely nothing to the table when it comes to Russia policy. And I mean, frankly, you could rank these in any order, but I've chosen this order. It just kind of seemed to work for me. The first is James Cleverly, who was Foreign Secretary for 14 months. He managed to get over the 1 year line and survive for 14 months between 2022 and 2023. And James Cleverly was the yes man. I mean, he's the man from Del Monte. He came in to replace Liz Truss, and He'd been Liz Truss's junior minister in the Foreign Office. Um, he was seen as a continuity candidate. Liz Truss was now Prime Minister, and James Cleverly was just a yes man, just to continue basically her policy towards Ukraine and Russia, which was hawkish, as we know, but he didn't really bring anything at all to the table in terms of the policy towards Russia and Ukraine. Nothing at all. Was he Russophobic? Yes, I'd say. Possibly linked to his military background. I don't know. Um, did he have diplomatic skills? Was he a diplomat? No, he's just an ex-army grunt who found his way into politics and by the freak of Conservative Party internal politics, found himself as Foreign Secretary, having been a sort of jobbing junior minister in the Foreign Office. Policy input practically non-existent. He was just there to kind of continue Liz Truss's policy towards Russia and Ukraine. His impact on the state. He didn't really have any ideas he didn't have a vision, for improving the Foreign Office, changing it in any way. Practically no impact. He did make noises about improving his skills, but there's no real follow through. I was in the diplomatic academy at the time, and it's just like, yeah, pretty non-existent. I mean, you get nice messages from the private office. Oh, the foreign secretary is really kind of keen that we focus on skills, but that would be it. Nothing more. He just, yeah, it was like a Bavarian meal. The foreign office sort of consumed him, then pooped him out the other end at the end of his time with absolutely no discernible impact on the organizational performance. He was popular though because he was a nice guy. I mean, he was amenable. He just kind of didn't rub the organization up the wrong way. He didn't get the organization to do anything that they didn't want to do, and maybe that's one of the reasons. And the tone of his correspondence and interaction with the organization was positive, which is, of course, a good thing. So he didn't try to get the organization to change, and he is quite nice. So his popularity was relatively high, I'd say. The second foreign secretary who had absolutely no impact at all was the shortest serving one, and that was Lord David Cameron, who was also prime minister during the Ukraine crisis. With Boris Johnson, he's one of two people who was both foreign secretary and prime minister during that period. And he was in the job for 7.5 months during the Rishi Sunak period from 2023 to 24. And he was just the organization would have, I mean, this is on the cusp of me leaving the organization, but the organization would have seen him as the person who was there to keep the seat warm. Because nobody really thought that Sunak would win an election in 2024. So Cameron was in there to kind of keep the seat warm and just tread water. Was he a Russophobe? I don't think so. Necessarily. I mean, I don't think he's on far either, but he wasn't obviously kind of driven by that deep rooted dislike of Russia that some other ministers further down the list exhibit. Diplomatic skills high, I'd say. I mean, I worked with him on the G8 summit in 2013, 2014. That's quite a clever maneuver to actually have it Northern Ireland to get the Americans on board. I mean, I think he did have sort of quite good statesman skills. Whatever your views on his decision to take us into a fated Brexit referendum, I think very good diplomatic skills. Policy input on Ukraine. I mean, he didn't really bring anything to the table. Quite frankly, the Sunak government as a whole was so focused on fixing the mess of Liz Truss's premiership when it comes to the economy that actually, Cameron was largely continuity kind of candidate when it came to foreign policy. I mean, I suspect he may have known that he wasn't going to be around for long enough to really shift the dial, and nothing really changed on Russian Ukraine policy during his time. He would have he would have had practically no impact on the state because the organisation knows, when a minister is going to be around for or gains, the amount of time that the minister is going to be around to impact on, what the organisation wants to do itself. So they knew that he would go as soon as the general election, happened, and he would have had very little impact on the state. And it's hard to judge his popularity because I'd already gone by that time. I'm sure he was respected and possibly liked, by the organisation because, he is. I mean, a bit like William Hague, Jeremy Hunt, very professional, courteous, old school. You might say that, but respected, by the organisation. I've got absolutely no reason to believe that he would have been disliked, at the Foreign Office. But yeah, they're there to keep the city warm. Yvette Cooper, no, she's actually the shortest person who's been Foreign Secretary during the Ukraine crisis. She's only been in the job since September of 2025, but she may well make a whole year. Who knows? It's too hard to tell. So I can't say that she's shortest serving because she's still in the office. That's the first thing to say. Now she is the nothing new to say foreign secretary. I mean, is she Russophobic? I mean, I'd say moderate high. I mean, I don't necessarily think that kind of is a core, part of what drives her, Russophobia necessarily from everything that I've seen on the press. I mean, diplomatic skills. I mean, I don't judge that Yvette Cooper is a statesperson. From what I've seen, uh, she strikes me as a minister who's far better suited to working in a line department where very technocratic, very capable, very professional. I mean, I've got a lot of respect for Yvette Cooper as a politician. I don't support the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, but I think she's a very professional, a very serious, kind of politician. But I don't think she's a diplomat, at all. The policy input on Ukraine has been practically non-existent. In fact, bizarrely, um, he said recently that even if the Europeans talk to the Russians, Macron has been talking about having a dialogue with the Russians. The UK won't talk to the Russians, and this is a policy that we've had in place that we won't talk to the Russians at the political level since 2014, and she just wants to continue that policy. And what that tells me, as somebody who knows what the Russia blob is like in the Foreign Office, uh, it tells me that that's what she's been briefed by the officials. She's had some sort of think piece, focus paper. She's done some red teaming exercise. She's probably approached it in a very professional way, and the organisation said, "Well, yeah, I know, but we probably, on balance, looking at all the factors, probably shouldn't still talk to Russia, even though everybody else is." And she swallowed it, because she hasn't been around long enough to squeeze the system. To say, well, actually, maybe we could try something else. That's just what I think. And I've seen nothing to suggest otherwise. So I think her impact on the organisation is low. She's only been there since September. I think David Lammy did kickstart some very positive things actually, on the organisation rather than on Russia policy. I mean, I've seen no evidence that's kind of really gathered steam. I spoke to some people in the Foreign Office who are still there. Yeah, too early to tell. Popularity. Yeah, I've got no reason to believe that she's an unpopular, foreign secretary internally within the organisation. I think she's a serious professional politician. She doesn't exude personal warmth, but then some ministers, are very very different, up close and personal, to what they are on the TV. And while I've met all of the British, foreign secretaries on the list that I've just gone through, I've not actually met her or David Lammy. So that's a blank spot in terms of my analysis, of course. And then we have the top three in terms of the three worst foreign secretaries, since the Ukraine crisis started. And at number three, drum roll, is David Lammy, who was foreign secretary 14 months. He got over the 1 year mark. Well done, David. Great job, between 24 and 2025. Now, the reason I've got David Lammy in the top three is because the Labour Party came to power. They've been out of power for 14 years. And very clearly, the Labour Party has arrived into office with some real challenges and missions which are very economically focused about rebuilding the economy, about creating opportunities for ordinary working people for jobs and prosperity and that sort of thing, focusing on green growth. The Labour Party hasn't really come into office, with a clear foreign policy platform. I'll come on to that in a minute. But David Lammy has plopped into the job. Is he a Russophobe? I'd say he probably is. Fairly Russophobic from everything I've seen. In the media. Is he a diplomat? I don't really think he is a diplomat. To be honest, he doesn't strike me as a credible statesman. He's very, very performative. He can make these kind of um, deeply hubristic speeches and all the rest of it. But I'm not really sure how seriously he would have been taken on the world stage. Actually, because the Labour Party came in with no vision for foreign policy. Lots of people criticise the Labour Party for having no vision for anything. Actually, I think that's unfair because they do have a vision, but they've got these challenges that they've set. But they flailed around and actually not really been able to deliver and actually resiled on some of their sort of election manifesto promises. And Keir Starmer is a deeply uninspiring and bland and tepid prime minister that just adds to the sense of drip. Um, so my criticism of Lammy is that he doesn't really have foreign policy, and because he doesn't have foreign policy, he's chosen to just to provide a point of difference, adopt a more extreme stance towards Russia than the Tories, just to show a point of difference. So he's ramping up sanctions, he's ramping up rhetoric against Russia. He's not really doing anything to kind of shift the dial on a losing war, in Ukraine. He's got no real ideas, except that if we're just tougher on Russia, then that's a good thing to do, which shows an intellectual vacuum there, quite frankly, in terms of how he's thinking about this challenge. So yeah, he's just veered. He's lurched even further to the right in terms of taking a hardline policy on Russia at a time. Um, when the world is changing, when more people, including in the US, are coming around to the idea that maybe this is a war that we can't win, that maybe just pumping billions and billions into Ukraine isn't the best bet. He's gone against the tide and he's struck out to say, well, no, we should be even tougher on Russia, which I think was frankly idiotic, but not surprising. His impact on the state, I think, was moderate. I mean, on the Russia policy, non-existent, of course, but I think there's an element of Hagishness about him trying to improve the Foreign Office. He tried to create this college of British diplomacy, to kind of make the UK a centre of excellence for diplomatic skills. Although there's a slight whiff of that being just selling dodgy courses to kind of foreign diplomats, because actually the disinvestment in diplomatic skills has been so acute since the previous Labour government, that actually there's no real sign that actually he was trying to improve the skills of the Foreign Office itself, rather than just make a bit of a sales pitch on diplomatic skills for the wider world. But I think he was trying to do stuff there, internally within the organisation. He brought in a more kind of a careerist Ollie Robbins, permanent under secretary, to get rid of the deeply underwhelming and ineffectual Philip Barton, who survived losing his job after the Kabul fiasco because we ditched Donald Raab over the side. So I think he did think that he had a vision for changing the Foreign Office, but like every other foreign secretary before him, he wasn't around long enough to deliver on it. Again, I didn't work with him or Yvette Cooper at all, so I've got no dialogue on his popularity within the organisation or otherwise. I've got nothing to lead me to believe that he's unpopular, but I mean, I've got nothing really to say, on that. Then number two and number one were difficult choices for me to make, and I really, really, really tussled with this. But then I looked at my kind of framework: Russophobia, diplomatic skills, policy input, impact on the state and popularity. Um, and in the end, I decided that number two should be Philip Hammond, who was Foreign Secretary from 2014 to 2016. Now, this was difficult for me in many ways because I saw Philip Hammond as the most dreadful and Russophobic, foreign secretary during my time at the Foreign Office. Um, his Russophobia was just off the charts. I mean, he came into a place, William Hague, of course, who cocked up when it came to the Normandy format. But I still regarded him as a statesman who wanted to actually make the Foreign Office, make UK diplomacy more powerful on the world stage. Um, Total change of tone when Philip Hammond came in. We should not engage with Russia, at all. They were bad, we were good, and there's no scope for debate at all on that. And that has, frankly, never changed apart from a brief period of thawing under Boris Johnson at the back end of 2017, start of 2018. I mean, that posture has not changed, right up until this day. And for that reason, I mean, Philip Hammond has set the tone for UK's negative and ineffectual policy towards Russia and Ukraine since 2014, through to now, 12 years. I mean, he's responsible for the state that we're in today, with basically having no policy and being completely sidelined on policy by the Americans. That all and Yvette Cooper still saying that we shouldn't talk to the Russians, which is a position that he locked in place. So Russophobia very, very high, diplomatic skills non-existent. I mean, this guy is should be in a Harry Potter movie as a villain. He's a total misanthrope, non-existent diplomatic skills. He's just not a very pleasant individual. Without going into some stories, around that, dour, uninspiring, grey, angry, introverted. How on earth did he become an MP? I don't know, but there we go. He was, and he was for 2 years our foreign secretary, and he absolutely sort of killed any scope for us to have a decent relationship with Russia. His policy input was very, very high. I mean, the whole policy of not talking to Russia was his policy. Uh, uh, you know, uh, Everything to do with slimming down any sort of economic engagement with Russia all goes back to him. All of the kind of negative cutting ourselves off from engagement with Russia all goes back to Philip Hammond, undoubtedly. He is the reason really why we're in the state we're in today in our dreadful relationship with Russia. His impact on the state was high. I mean, he got the whole organisation to get behind this. He was involved in big increases in resources for the intelligence agencies, and of course for the Foreign Office itself, with the creation of a new Russia unit. Of course, Whitehall Russia unit, in King Charles Street. He made the machine work. I mean, he did. It worked in the way which is deleterious to a long-term strategic objective. But he made it work. So his impact on the state was high. His popularity was low, just because he was, I mean, I'd say on the Russia side, I mean, maybe his popularity was higher, but in the organization as a whole, I'd say his popularity was low just because he's a deeply unlikable character, quite frankly, dreadful, manager of people, and very little good to say, frankly, about Philip Hammond. But at number one, I have to announce that it is Liz Truss, who was both Foreign Secretary and went on from Foreign Secretary to be Prime Minister. I'm not judging her on a work as Prime Minister. That's not what this video is about. She, a bit like Boris Johnson, when he became Prime Minister, he kind of put on this mantle of some sort of Churchillian figure, wanting to defeat the Reds. Liz Truss almost kind of had this Margaret Thatcher kind of complex. where Ukraine was a bit like her version of the Falklands, and this was just a war that we had to win. Come what may, Russophobia, like Hammond, up there, off the charts. Completely, Ukrainophilia, if that's even a word. The same, stratospheric kind of level. Well, they're not rooted in any intellectual kind of analysis of it, just because they were good, Russia was bad, and should side with the Ukrainians, come what may, with absolutely no analysis involved. I mean, this is a person who didn't even know, who actually thought that Voronezh and Rostov on Don were in Ukraine, for example, when she went out to Russia. How embarrassing is that? She's not a diplomat. I mean, she's a political lightweight as far as I'm concerned. Uh, yeah, yeah, and a disastrous visit to Russia, I think is probably proof of that. Her policy impact was enormous. I mean, she wanted to sanction absolutely everybody in Russia if she possibly could, if he had the resources to do it. And of course, we didn't have the resources to do it, so we only sanctioned a couple of thousand. But still, she was uber hawkish on basically doing everything that the Americans under Biden, wanted to do, on Russia, and actually anything the Ukrainians asked for, she'd want to give them, even if it was stupid. Unlike Ben Wallace, who actually was also, the defense secretary at the time, who was also, I thought sort of saw himself as a modern day Lord Cardigan, maybe wanted to have the charge of a light brigade into the Crimea again. But yeah, he was a bit more pragmatic in terms of the amount of UK military support we could realistically give to Ukraine. At that time. So big, huge policy input sort of on Russia, and very much supportive of all the kind of daft ideas that the UK got involved with, like the kind of helping the Ukraine with a counteroffensive in 2023. I mean, she after Boris Johnson had basically nixed the Istanbul sort of agreement, following his visit to see Zelensky in April of 2022. A couple of weeks later, at her Mansion House speech, she called for Ukraine to take back all of lands that Russia had occupied, right back to 2014, including Crimea. I mean, that was how, yeah, that was how idiotic, and delusional, in fact, that she was, because she was completely delusional. I mean, there was no way that Ukraine, without NATO troops fighting alongside them, would ever be able to retake the lands that it had lost in 2014, or including to retake Crimea. And yet she said it. I mean, totally unhinged, delusional, and idiotic position. But that was a position that she took, and because the Ukrainians, that's what the Ukrainians wanted, so she'd give the Ukrainians whatever they wanted, come what may. And that was her policy: do what the Ukrainians want. The Ukrainians ask something, give it to them. I mean, like a teenager, outside of the tuck shop, with a favorite boyfriend. I don't know. Goodness me. Impact on the state. Low, I'd say, in terms of the organisation of the Foreign Office. She wasn't a diplomat. She had no vision for the Foreign Office. She was a single issue Foreign Secretary, and that was inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia. A single issue Foreign Secretary. Quite frankly. I mean, but the organisation, I mean, she wanted to make food diplomacy a priority. Yeah, after when she's International Trade Secretary, her clownish, outburst about pork products to China. She literally wanted to make food diplomacy a thing. What the hell is that? Like, there's a guy who's going to get posted to Russia, and he worked as a journalist before he joined the Foreign Office, and when he was meant to be doing Russian language training, because of his journalistic background, she got him to do this Foreign Office cookbook as part of her food diplomacy drive. And when he failed his Russian exams, he came to me when I was in the academy, and I said, I'm not going to let you go on your immersion trip to Estonia to brush up on your Russian because you haven't failed the exams you're meant to do already. he said, well, I've been working on this cookbook. So what do you think I care about that? And he didn't go. But I believe he possibly will later. I mean, defeating Russia and cupcakes. There we go. First time I said it's made up on the spot, but I mean, that sums up how daft Liz Truss's foreign policy was she popular? I mean, she wasn't Dominic Raab, so by comparison, she was popular. But and then, of course, she went on to be prime minister, and that hard line, policy towards Russia just continued, solidified. She was basically kind of yeah, Biden's sidekick. Doing everything the Americans wanted us to do, taking us right back to Philip Hammond. The person in second place in 2014, doing everything that Victoria Nuland wanted us to do. Utter disaster. Who's set back any ability the UK may have to recover relations with Russia when this dreadful war comes to an end. Complete failure as foreign secretary, a lackluster, politician, disastrous, prime minister. Yeah, um, she is my worst UK foreign secretary out of 10 foreign secretaries since 2014. One policy towards Ukraine, utter failure. And how embarrassing it is for me as a British diplomat to admit that to you today. I hope you found that interesting and informative. Um, yeah, please do leave any comments and questions in the chat as always. I wish for us to get a foreign secretary in the future who is a genuine statesperson, who looks at the conflict in Ukraine, recognizes that it cannot be won, that we do not have the resources to keep it running just to humour Zelensky, and that the only way forward is for us to cut a deal that helps Ukraine to recover, that helps us to establish some sort of equilibrium on the European continent, that actually explores for the first time in a practical way the idea of a new security architecture for Europe that recognizes the indivisibility of security for all people, including for Russia, but also for Ukraine, and that gets us out of this god awful mess which we first got tipped into when Philip Hammond became Foreign Secretary in the summer of 2014. My name is Ian Proud. I'm the Smunger, and as always, I wish you all very much peace.